Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us from the around the world. And my name is Ashwini, and I'll be your host for today's session. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking time and joining us today. And before we start, many organizations have a successfully launched AI pilot programs, but only a small number manage to achieve enterprise-wide adoption. The challenge is no longer simply providing the AI works. The real challenge is building the operational foundation needed to be scale AI across the business. Today's session focuses on important question: why do you successful AI programs often fail after the pilot stage? More importantly, we will explore how organization can close the operational gap, establish effective governance and execution models, and turn AI initiative into measurable business outcomes. Joining us today's we are having a Ben and our chief commercial officer and Kristen chief product officer who will be share practical strategies for scaling AI driving meaningful business impact. Now let's get started. Over to you, Ben and Kristen. All stage is yours.
Perfect. Thank you for the introduction, Christian. Good to see you again.
You too, Ben. It's always great to do these webinars with you, and huge thanks for everybody making time today from around the world. We see we've got lots of folks on the call today, so very excited to be here.
Yes, definitely lots of interest. And the good thing is, or the interesting thing, I guess, is, Christian and I, we do this on a regular basis. Now, the last time, or since the last time we did this, Christian, we've had even, more customer opportunities and programs start. So we even have some more examples and insights as to what is a practical framework from, thinking about AI to really, I kind of use the phrase operationalize it, right? Like actually driving things to an impact. I think a lot of customers that we work with are struggling to move from I know I need to adopt AI and I've started to do it, but I'm struggling on getting my employees to adapt to it, right? And I think that's one of the key things that hopefully will come out on this session today is simply enabling access to AI technologies and driving the adoption of the technology doesn't even get you halfway there, right? I mean, it sets things up, but when people start to change the way they work, that is what is driving, that phrase, return on investment, but more importantly, driving the impact. It's changing the way business works. Christian, what are your thoughts on this as we tee things up?
I mean, couldn't agree with you more, Ben. I come at this with just to be fully upfront and transparent, a bias, and my bias really is that AI is interesting and obviously having an incredible impact on everything going on in the world today. But as I think about it, especially in the enterprise space, it's not really that interesting to me until it changes real work. It is certainly, early indications are that there's broad adoption, and adoption is happening much on a continual basis, and we're seeing that if you look over the year-over-year numbers. There has been incredible adoption, but what's interesting is that on an industry level, you're not seeing necessarily yet the ROI and the impact numbers trickle in. And so to me, ultimately, that's where the rubber meets the road and where AI gets interesting, right? We've got to shift from helping people with using AI to generate content in certain contexts, actually shifting the way that the entire organization works, the way it's governed, so you can manage the risk, and ultimately then how do you scale it? And that's really what we're here to talk about today. And that is, to me, where AI becomes interesting and important for enterprises. Oh, Ben, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was coughing for a moment.
Great stuff, though. You're very animated.
I was all excited because I was going to make a funny comment, which is when you said you wanted to be transparent, I had this image of your video actually, becoming transparent. So I was kind of waiting for you to fade away. But Yeah, no, 100%, which is I think there's two things going on, and as I talk, people can look at the screen. One is this notion of operationalizing AI and moving from simple adoption to actually adapting how people work, which is where as we get into is often revolving around workflows. I think the other thing that people are starting to get into this or realize is this is an ongoing effort, right? Like, AI isn't a one and done thing. It's not like you're rolling out Microsoft Office. And this is why I like at the bottom, of this slide, I put, sustained adoption, right? So it's not just how do I get my employees to use it effectively today, but AI is going to continue to change and evolve, and we're going to have to continue to look at employees and how they use AI and their related workflows. And it's going to be an ongoing effort, the sustained aspect side of things. So, what I'm going to do in this session is I'm going to take about half the time and tee things up. Like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? What is happening in the industry? What are we seeing from our point of view? And then Christian's going to go and take us a little bit deeper into what we call the Adoptify AI framework. And the shorthand is kind of a three by three quadrant approach so that we have a framework that we find works very well for customers that are going through these kind of challenges. Now, if you're not aware about it, Adoptify AI, we're part of Starter Inc. You can go to Adoptify AI's website. You can read more about us, learn more about us. There's links at the end of today's session where you can learn and take a self-assessment and things like this. But at Adoptify AI, we literally work with customers and develop and create programs for them to help them move through this AI journey, this journey of becoming ready for AI and remaining ready for AI. And as you can see here, I wanted to put some numbers behind this because I always hate kind of abstract statements. In the bottom right-hand corner, if you haven't read Microsoft Works Trends report, the LinkedIn Workplace report, these are really good examples. You can Google or Bing search or ask an AI tool for links to these reports. They're very eye-opening in so much as they are now serving a lot of customers who are going through changes in their workforce and through their workplace, right? Now, the interesting thing is, as people continue to use AI, and this could either be company sanctioned or it could just be employees going and using AI tools themselves. I call that shadow AI, right? Which is, kind of unauthorized or unapproved use of AI. But the vast majority of people are struggling to understand how to effectively use it, right? Now, the on the backdrop of this stuff is, as people continue to work, we just don't have enough time to do everything we do, right? And as this shift starts to happen, when companies are looking to hire people nowadays, they're actually take someone who has more of an AI mindset and AI skills than an experienced candidate that doesn't have them. And this is that second box, which is really interesting because the value and the impact of someone who knows how to use AI is increasingly becoming more important than an experienced person because AI really helps to um, replace or augment that experience, right? So we used to call them, I don't know, years ago, we were called them like digital natives, right? Someone who is very comfortable living in the digital world. Well, now that, has kind of evolved to being, an AI native or an AI first type person. The takeaway from that is if you as an individual are not learning how AI impacts your industry, your company, and your role, those three things in particular, you increasingly are at risk of being left behind. Companies are really focused on finding people that are comfortable using those AI technologies. Now, this is kind of where if you look at, box number one, which is, I don't have enough time. So if you give me tools that either augment or automate my workflow and my day-to-day tasks, I really would find that useful, right? Because I don't have enough time. Companies are saying, I'm going to hire people or prefer people that have AI experience over work history experience. But box number three is where the irony, which is, you know, a lot of companies aren't able to get the two working together, right? Only 19% of organizations have both the capability of the people and the readiness of the organization to get the value out of their AI investment. What do I mean by that? Many of the customers we work with are quickly finding out you can get maybe your people ready because you gave them training on how to use, I don't know, Microsoft Copilot or Google Gemini. Or you can make sure that your IT team has, effectively rolled out the software licenses and, technically is ready to go. But if you don't have the two working together, and if your people are not ready and your organization isn't ready, you're not going to be able to move forward. You're going to get stuck on those things. So they're not struggling to invest in AI. My gosh, I mean, some of the budgets I see from some of our customers is crazy. The amount of money they're spending on the technology, right?
Yeah.
It's I don't think there's ever an open checkbook, but there's definitely a lot of willingness for the leadership team of companies to say, I see or I understand the potential value of investing in AI, and they're willing to do it. What they're struggling, though, is actually to turn that technology investment into something that actually has a measurable business impact or an outcome. So let's go a little bit deeper in this as I tee things up for Christian, because Christian is going to take us through how we solve, all these different things. Now, again, a lot of this is getting the organization ready. And I'll take you through just some thoughts and insights and lessons learned on this. But it's not just about getting people to use the technology, right? It is really getting them to understand how the AI technology can change their workflows. AI can help augment things that people do. They can help replace or automate certain tasks in these workflows. So some of these things that we've come across is um, misaligned priorities. And what do I mean by that? The business expects a return on their investment, right? And they have high hopes for this. We're investing in this because we expect, increased productivity. Therefore, we can measure that as a return on investment. But they don't go through the hard work of looking at the AI use cases. And the reason why this is important and often gets misaligned is the way people use technology changes based on their job role. Now, let me say that again. The way people use AI tools changes based on their job role. And this is something that's really important. If I'm on the marketing team, I'm going to use Microsoft Copilot in quite a different way than if I'm a member of the finance team. The finance team is going to use, Copilot to use prompts and inside Microsoft Excel, and they're going to do financial tasks, right? Whereas on the marketing side, right, many marketeers will use AI in a generative AI way. They're going to use Microsoft Copilot to produce presentations. They're going to do market research and things like that. Well, those are two different use cases, right? And if companies don't get down to how is this team going to use AI versus this team, and what are the workflows within team A versus team B, you're going to get misalignment, right? And you're going to get mismatched expectations. right? This goes into point number two, which is okay, so you have your use cases, you looked at your teams, right? You're seeing how, you know, this AI technology that I'm rolling out. And again, this is a general statement. This could be, ChatGPT, it could be Claude, it could be Copilot, it could be a very specific AI type tool, right? But if you're not looking at changing how your workflows happen, then you're going to get what's called workflow friction. And what do I again mean by that? You roll out a tool and people keep doing their work in the old way. The irony being they actually have a way to become more efficient, but no one's gone in and said, okay, you did step one, two, three, four. Now, step three, use the AI tool in this way. And now you're going to change how that workflow, which is made up of all these tasks and steps, actually helps. So, I was with a customer a few weeks ago, and they hadn't gone down to this level of I rolled out the tool, I trained the people on the tool, I had my governance policies put into place, but when I followed up with the people using the tools, they were using it in the most simple way possible because they said, "Yeah, I understood the capabilities, the training helped me understand the power of this, but no one actually explained to me how to do my work differently." And what happened was, even within teams, they had people using it in different ways at different levels of capability. Christian, thoughts on these first two things?
Yeah, I mean, real life example, but we're working with a company right now, Ben, and initially when we were brought in and started the conversations, a lot of it started with, hey, we've got dynamics. Our sales team and our account teams don't necessarily embrace dynamics or are not great about keeping it up to date or even entering information in the first place or gaming the system. So we want to build a bunch of agents, and can you come in and help us build these agents? And of course, we engage and are helping. But one of the first things we asked about is their processes, right, and their workflows. And what was clear is that they don't really have them defined, right? They don't have any standards. There isn't ownership necessarily or governance around that, and so it becomes really hard to apply AI to that. Now, I want to call out the fact that I don't think at the same time, every organization needs to take this massive step back and spend, months and years documenting all of their processes and making sure it's perfect, because that's not the world we live in. But having some basis for that, and then making sure you're looking at it, as you mentioned, Ben, on ways to optimize it is critical, right? As I use the term paving the cow path, right? If all you're doing is paving the cow path, well, if that cow path happens to go around a lake because years ago that's the only way to get around it, and it takes you 3 days, okay, maybe you get there in 2 days because you've paved it, but wouldn't it be easier to just build a bridge that takes you a minute and a half to get across it, right? So, there's this balance you have to find, but absolutely, we're seeing this time and time again when we're engaged with customers, and finding that, making sure there's clarity on the workflows, clarity on ownership, and then optimizing them rather than just sort of trying to make them faster.
Well, I will say, Christian, I know some of the members of our team are in this webinar today. They're new hires and they're learning and stuff like this. Anyone playing webinar bingo, cowpath analogy, you can now check cowpath analogy on your webinar bingo, and building a bridge versus paving the cow path to go around a lake. But all joking aside, 100% Christian in terms of one, we're going down the path of helping people today understand a framework and how to systematically approach this problem so that they can operationalize it. And I'm using and emphasizing these words deliberately because, in the end, you do want to have an approach where you have a point of view on are we all aligned on the expected outcomes? That's, number one. Number two is have we looked at their workflows, right? And like you said, it doesn't have to be in depth. This isn't something where you take 6 months. We don't have time. to do it, right? There's this need to jump in, start using AI and start learning from it, but do it in a way that's intentional, right? In addition to looking at, the workflows, are we looking at people's capabilities? Now, this often can be one of the easier parts, and a lot of companies almost over focus on it, which is I need to get my team trained. I need them to have the skills and the capabilities to use this AI technology effectively. I mentioned this before, but in this particular section, it's really important. They need role-based training. And I cannot emphasize that enough. I worked with a healthcare company and they said, we rolled this AI tool out to, I don't know, almost 7,000 employees. They're very excited about it. The tool was, grounded in their company data. It had all the safeguards. You could ask questions of it or give you really good answers and outputs and build presentations. And no one ended up using it because the training they did was generic and they never did anything that was specific to a team and specific to how that team operates their workflows. And it literally, it bounced off of these 7,000 people. Very powerful tool, but missing that context. Now, the last one is something that is popping up more and more when we work with customers. And one of this is, yes, you need to have what I call guardrails, right? You need to have, your acceptable use policies, what to do, what not to do. You need to have your security set up. You need to have clean data. AI, obviously operates on top of data, both internal and external. Increasingly, governance is becoming really important. Governance in terms of, do we have policies put into place? Do we have ways to enforce those policies? Do we have audit trails? And a lot of this is reminding people again and again, this is a continuous journey. Once we start using this tool, the tool is going to continue to evolve. The use cases on how it's going to be used will continue to expand. The workflows that need to be revised will continue to expand across everything the company does. It needs to be a sustained focus. Now, with that in mind, there's kind of four shifts that really help organizations go from what I was saying is kind of the problems to here's four things that you want to focus on, right? One is going from, AI literacy to AI fluency. That's awareness and capability, right? What do I mean literacy to fluency? One is giving people the knowledge of what is AI, how is it used, what are the capabilities. That is basic literacy. Think of that of like, how do you use a computer? Well, a computer has a screen. It has, a CPU if you're really old like I am. It has a keyboard and things like this. People need that basic fundamental knowledge. But if you're going to get people to use AI effectively, they need to have the skills and the capability. They need to become fluent in AI. And I love that word, fluent in fluency, right? Because in many ways, using AI is like speaking a new language, right? I'm a Canadian, to some degree, I'm bilingual in French, right? When I speak to French people, I think and I say things in a different way, understanding the language, right? So to move from basic literacy to functional fluency becomes really important because fluency means they know how to use it in their line of work. The second thing is every company we work with is very good at doing pilots. Pilots are easy, right? Pilots is take a small group of people, maybe a team, roll out this technology to the team, see how it works, refine things and stuff like this. Well, when you're going to find out when you do a pilot, when you expand it to another team and another team and you start to roll it out, it doesn't quite end up being a, copy and paste type thing. What works for one team doesn't always work for, and often doesn't work for another team. Maybe the core fundamentals does, but you have to go back, like I said on the earlier slide, this notion of looking at workflows, this notion of looking at governance, right? Making sure that you understand your AI use cases so that, one, as you roll this out from a one team pilot to across the company, you do it in a way where you can say, okay, every team needs to have an understanding of the impact on that team's workflow, the understanding of the use cases that are specific to that team. Is there any changes in governance and policies to that team? Typically not. Typically, these are company-wide governance policies. But once you start approaching things in that way, now it becomes more repeatable, which means it now becomes more scalable and sustainable. And now you're at the beginning of thinking about this as an operating model. And an operating model isn't a one and done pilot. It isn't a, hey, we, did the pilot, we roll it out to the whole company, now we're on to the next thing. It is literally a shift in thinking. Now, with this, it goes back to the bottom box on the left around training and applications, which is connecting that learning, that training to real workflows. And this often means that companies end up doing team specific education so that they can go and say, here's Microsoft Copilot, here's some basic understanding of how it works and the notion of prompting and all the rest. Now, let's look at a real example, right? A real example that this team goes through on a regular basis, aka a workflow, right? Now you're giving that context, right? And then understanding that as the tool evolves, we're going to have to go back and give updated workflows and updated world scenarios. And then the last one is activity and outcomes, right? This comes back to the measurement side of things, right? All the finance guys and the leadership teams, they all want, an analysis, right? They want numbers, right? It was this, it's now that, right? Very quickly, it can be tricky in terms of understanding what you should look at in terms of tracking, right? And the easiest thing is to track activities, right? How many courses we're after, how many people went to the course, how many people attended the course, how many people activated their license, and things like that. Well, these are activities. How do you measure outcomes, right? And we're going to go a little bit deeper when Christian gets to his part of today's
Yeah.
session. But this becomes more important of, many companies initially track usage because it's so easy to do, right? Versus
Yeah,
tracking those outcomes. Christian?
usage counts as amounts. I mean, we're working with another company yesterday. One of the, they're engaging with us, and they want to make sure we can support them and build out their dashboard. And they defined a bunch of core metrics or KPIs, and most of them were fantastic. But there were a few in there that were, interesting. Like they want to track and show the growth on the number of agents created. And I get it. On the surface, you would say, well, that's a great metric. At the same time, it's an easy one to game, right? You can
Yeah.
you can build a million age. I can build the agents and have agents build agents tomorrow. Doesn't mean they're actually yielding any value or they're the right ones to build out. So it's that natural evolution. So I understand where people start there, but distilling out the activity from the impact is really important. Because ultimately, as well, often, as you mentioned, Ben, the pilots show great success early, but they're oftentimes the easy scenarios and often don't have the measurable business outcomes or tracked, aligned well with some sort of financial implication or something that the CFO or executive team is going to get behind. So, it's finding the narrowing it down and building on the success and then making sure you've got that outcome that you can measure.
Yeah, I love that analogy of tracking the number of agents being built. It's kind of like tracking the number of PowerPoints that Ben creates, right? Doesn't mean Ben's
Which is a
creating
lot.
good
I mean, that's a
PowerPoints,
lot.
you know.
That's a lot of PowerPoints.
That's a lot of PowerPoints, so and then, the other one I think, where we often help customers is they're like, can you help us understand the type of things we should be tracking? And this is, Christian, what you're highlighting, right? Like it's not just, the easy metrics, but many customers are looking for, again, almost that framework of, in this particular, part, these are the things you should start, looking at. So if we move forward a little bit and everyone's going to get a copy of this session afterwards and so on. Um, this I really like in terms of the table, in terms of many people are on the left, they're AI aware, but they're not AI ready. And I love it, right? And one is like AI aware organizations versus AI ready workforces. These are some really good distinctions between the two, right? And anyone who's on today's session, I challenge you to just mentally run through these things and say, where does my company sit today? Right? Is AI embedded in workflows? Is the adoption consistent across the teams? Right? If marketing knows how to use AI really well and they're using it all the time, they've changed their workflows and all the rest, but the finance team is like, well, I kind of like my Excel spreadsheets, and they're not changing. The return on investment, to use that overused phrase, happens when the entire company is consistently using AI specific to their team and their workflows. Meaning, if one team's really good at it and another team's not, you're really only move forward the team. Unless all the teams are moving forward, the company's not going to move forward. The company really needs to start thinking about AI across everything. Not, one team is doing it while another teams aren't. So have a look through this, mental checklist and see, for your own organization, how many are you on the left and how many on the right. The interesting thing is everyone I meet, there's always some on the left and some on the right, right? It's always a mixture of both because everyone seems to be stuck in the middle. I'm partially AI aware in these things. I am partially AI ready in these things, but I'm starting to find out if not everything's in the AI ready column, I am not consistently moving forward and I'm stuck. I am stuck in between these two different things. Now, how do some of these things show up, right? If you're in between some of this, AI aware and AI ready, right? How do I see this, right? What's the impact of these things? Well, obviously, what happens is, on the workforce side of things, right? It's inconsistent. That's basically what this box is, right? Over here, they're using it, consistently. Over here, they're not. Now, when teams are working together, some understand, this was AI generated or AI was used to help do it. I need to look at, the quality of the output and all the rest. But because everyone, I don't know, is not on the same page, you get this friction, right? At the same point in time, right, if not everyone, the people are on the same page, same thing happens on the workflows, right? And this is really interesting because some companies are really good as they go down this journey of modifying teams' workflows. Perfect, great. Now you're thinking about things. How can AI automate certain things in a workflow, augment certain things in a workflow? When you start looking at workflows across teams, that becomes a bigger challenge, right? And this goes back to what I said earlier. If one team knows how to use AI really well and one team doesn't, and they have workflows that span the two teams, now you're going to be getting friction, right? Third thing is this notion of the guardrails, the governance, the oversight of things, which is okay, my employees are using it really well, so I reduce the friction there. The workflows are working pretty good, right? Now I want to make sure that they're using it and doing it in the right way, the governance side of things, right? And if you're not having a way to measure and validate and audit and report on those things, you're going to get friction there. So friction, friction, friction happening all over the place. Now, this is where I'm going to take a break, and I think Christian, hand things over to you. Is this the right way you want me to
Yeah.
hand things over to you?
No,
Tell
I think
me,
that seems reasonable.
tell us how to solve all these problems that I just articulated and made it sound really complex. How do we get out of the
All right,
box?
I'm going to help you solve the problem where you have people like Ben creating thousands of PowerPoints using AI, and only some people are reading. No, just kidding.
You can use me
So,
as a case study. Go ahead.
so what you're seeing here is the framework we use, and it's simple on purpose, right? So you have three readiness tracks down the side that Ben talked about on from a people perspective, organization perspective, and governance. And then you've got three stages across the top that we call adopting, adapting, and accelerating. And the point of this is not the grid itself. It's really what it forces and how it makes you think about it, right? So um, if you read it one track at a time, people readiness runs from building confidence, as Ben said, to applying AI consistently and developing those champions and getting that culture embedded into the organization. Organizational readiness runs from assessing the capability to actually enabling your workflows and then optimizing the performance and making it repeatable and predictable and then showing those outcomes. And then the governance, and again, as you go through the tracks, you can see that it's early stages around establishing the guardrails and then building on them, and then ultimately scaling them responsibly to the point where governance becomes an accelerant, not a breakpoint for your organization. And the grid, as I mentioned, it's not about the grid. Obviously, this is not the most revolutionary format here, but what it is about what it actually does, and frankly, it drives people to be a little bit uncomfortable, or organizations, because it ultimately makes name your weakest track. As Ben mentioned, as you go through these journeys, you're really only as strong as an organization based on your weakest area, where the area that you need the most point. And it makes it front and center, right? And politically, that's hard often, right? Because most of the time, the strongest track is the loudest champion, right? The person who ran the successful pilot is in every meeting talking about it, and then but then governance is sort of sitting there quietly and nobody's speaking about it, and that there's a lot of attention, but then when it comes to making it real, it becomes really hard, right? And at the end of the day, you don't get to average your way out of this and get to maturity. You don't just sort of get to, you have to really think about how you move the organization together and make sure you're being honest across all these three tracks and across these different dimensions, because ultimately that's how they have to work together, and that's how you scale this, right? So if you want to keep moving, Ben, in terms of the journey itself, right? So let's go a little bit more into the stages, and talk about what this looks like, right? So on the adopting side of things, this is where as we talked about, you're building that capability, you're trying to work out those repeatable practices, you're laying that foundation, and this is real. This is useful work, and most of the organizations that we're working with are here. Even if they think they're further along, most of them honestly are here. Even when they have successful pilots that makes them feel like they're further along. On the adapting side, this is where, as we mentioned, you're integrating AI into your core business process, into your workflows. You're figuring out how to standardize them across the team. Doesn't mean you're copying and pasting them, but you're making them real. and then you're hardening the execution, right? You're running, as I say, running water through it to make sure that it holds up and you can scale it. And this is real. This is a phase where it stops being a collection of small pilots and wins and starts becoming how the organization works together, right? So you go from an individual or a small team that's declaring success to one where all of a sudden the teams and the organizations are working differently, right? And ultimately, it really doesn't matter how big a company is, especially in today's day and age. It's almost impossible to land anything. I don't care if you're building widgets or manufacturing or technology. At the end of the day, you need almost all functions involved in that work. And it's when the work you start to see AI bringing those teams and bringing those functions together differently. That's where you start to see the value of it. And then on the accelerating side, this is where you're optimizing. The governance is happening at scale, and you're delivering outcomes that you can literally put in front of the board. And this is where the board and the executives get excited, because now you're moving from that activity motion to outcome. And this is where almost every company gets stuck. It's the stall is between adapting and accelerating in most cases, and a big part is because the reason is human. It's standardizing and scaling is frankly boring, right? It's everybody wants to do the pilot, everybody wants to show that off, but the hard work and making it scale is putting all the glue together, and that's not glamorous, right? And it's also I think organizations, we see this time and time again, they're chronically under resourcing it, right? To bring all that together. And it's hard. People are struggling with how best to do that. Do you do it in a federated way? How do you set up your center of excellence or your office? And how do you roll that out through the organization? And so it's challenging. And that's frankly where the friction occurs. And that's often where you're getting the most resistance, right? So what happens is instead is what I call the second pilot trap, right? So rather than doing that tedious work, companies are just, all right, well, let's go find our next pilot, and it's shiny and it makes them feel good. It makes it feel like progress, but at the end of the day, it's not really maturing the organization. And there's only so many successful pilots that the board or your executive team wants to look at without really seeing the outcomes and seeing the organization mature. And then, if you look at the studies that continue to come out, there is a continued focus on organizations struggling to see the net benefit of this. I think everybody looks at AI and experienced it one way or the other on their own, and they say, this is transformational. This is life-changing in many ways. But it's interesting on the enterprise side, we're generally not seeing that yet at scale. The frontier AI native companies are proclaiming that more than most, but it's not happening at the level you would expect for where we are, and it's because it's hard, right? So then if we move on the next slide here, Ben, we talk about where governance stops being a side conversation and it becomes a priority. So the reality is, that for years, and I think in general, the G word, governance word, in many cases is a dirty word for folks, right? Generally, people think about it as, all right, this is the department of no. They're just going to come in and shut everything down. They're going to show up late and put friction in the way, and it just sort of going to make our jobs hard. And that view is not just outdated, but it's in the world of AI. Frankly, it's genuinely dangerous. And here's what's changed, right? So the expectations are expanding rapidly across all industries, right? So the organizations that are able to operationalize AI responsibly are, at the end of the day, simply will be the ones left standing and scaling, right? And those that don't are going to have a really, really hard time not only operating in this world, but demonstrating that they can do so responsibly, right? So responsible and fast stopped being this trade-off, right? It used to be, well, we'll just move fast and we'll kind of figure it out later. But now responsible is what lets you go fast from the beginning, because you don't have to go clean up the mess, or you're not worried about introducing some risk that where you're looking over your shoulder, right? There's international standards as well, right? ISO 42001 for managing AI is a big one. And it's really important not to underestimate what it takes to get this and implement this politically within your organization, right? The ISO standards, as an example, it gives your board and your risk committee a language that they trust, and now that's what this is what turns AI governance from this sort of vague concept into something that you can hold people accountable for. And you're starting to see the groundswell of adoption here, and in other frameworks, and ultimately where organizations are going to be held accountable. The EU AI Act is another one as well that's front and center. And organizations are going to have to demonstrate that they are responsibly integrating AI and the outcomes of that. And so this is absolutely a board level priority. And then the last thing I'll say is on the agentic AI front, right? This is the one, frankly, that changes everything, right? So, for the most part, up until now, most people are using sort of Gen AI to create content, and your big AI risk was mostly embarrassment, right? So a hallucination, a bad answer, some weird output that got into the wild that you didn't necessarily didn't mean to, but it was manageable. But now with semi-autonomous and autonomous agents becoming more and more prevalent, AI, it changes the category entirely, right? So the moment that software is taking actions on your behalf or on an enterprise's behalf, whether that be from a workflow perspective, financial, somehow some financial implication of that in terms of, your back-end systems, or actually sending messages or communicating on behalf, or changing your underlying data, it stops going from this, embarrassment risk to becoming a true balance sheet risk, and a true liability for the organization if not managed well. So this is where you can't let the autonomy run ahead of the oversight. And there's been some recent very, very notable things that have happened lately, where there's some runaway autonomous issues, or LLMs that have created, and agents that have created some real security risks. So reframing this is, it's not, governance shouldn't be thought of as a brake. It really should be thought of as the accelerant, right? It allows you to take your foot off the brake and ultimately move faster. Okay, speaking of moving faster, I know we've got a lot to cover still, Ben. So, when we think about operationalizing it, this is how we generally work with our companies, and how we recommend organizations to go through the model, right? So there's 4 transitions, if you will, and ultimately how this plays out, right? So from experiment to execution, you move from a proven use case into that defined workflow, like we mentioned. You have real owners attached, and notice I use the word owner because that's super important here. And that's where the handoff happens. And ultimately, if you don't have that ownership, it's where it's really hard to scale and drive that handoff across organizations. Next, you go from that individual use to the team adoption, right? So you're standardizing the capability, and you're moving from the early adopters that have embraced it and were not necessarily intimidated by AI. And now you're making that handoff from the enthusiast to everybody in your organization, right? And that could be folks that want to embrace AI, just didn't know how to, or it could be people that are resistant to it. But at the end of the day, that's where that's the hugely important transition, and one where most programs fail to make that transition because it just doesn't get to the mainstream, or at least not yet. The next is around shifting from those pilot metrics to those true business metrics, right? Moving from, as I mentioned, the counts and amounts, okay, the number of agents, the number of actions, the number of people, your daily active usage. All those are interesting, but at this point, when you're focusing on your business metrics, that's where the handoff happens from the innovation team and starts being, an interesting conversation where finance gets involved, because there's real outcome and business impact from that, and one where your finance team or your executive team will stand up and get behind the actual implications of that, right? And then lastly, from project governance to operating, right? So as I mentioned, governance stops being the checkbox at launch, which most of the time it is today. Like, hey, before you go launch something, go get your privacy standard, your compliance lead involved, and have them sign off and rubber stamp. And that's simply not going to work in this age of AI. It might have worked when you're launching a website or building an application, and you can kind of play catch up. But the risk exposure and the landscape is just too broad and too fast in the AI space here. And so ultimately, you need to see that as a huge accelerant and core to everything you do. And so this is a broad strokes of how we do it. If we look at if we keep going, I won't spend a lot of time here because you'll see one of the illustrative examples we have is showing the early outcomes being the workforce adoption, and hours reclaimed becomes a real number based on their roles, and actually looking at how AI and the integration of AI into the workflows change people's ultimately what they did, and ability to reclaim or repurpose hours, and then how those actions were executed across the different parts of the organization. And so you see that in the early stages that you can really get some tangible benefits that now you build on as you standardize and scale, and ultimately get the board or your executive team behind here, right? So the numbers are not the story necessarily I want to focus on here. It's really the operating model, right? That it's the operating model that is what produces these numbers and ultimately allows you to do it with scale and execution excellence, as I mentioned before. Okay, so I alluded to this as well on the visibility side. Everything we described only works if your organization and leaders can see it, right? And I think today a lot of the dashboards that I've seen don't carry a lot of weight. They today measure what's easy to measure, as we talked about, the logins and maybe seat utilization, the data that's easy to pull, but they don't go to the next level down. They're not working with the teams. They're not looking at the workflows. They're not looking at how someone's job actually changes, because it's hard. And ultimately, it means you have to go deep into that and really look at all those pieces and bring it together. But ultimately, that's how we've had success working with companies. And ultimately, that's where we've been able to drive, working with those companies, drive that transition from the pilot stage to scale and the execution and acceleration phase of this. And so that's why the dashboard and the work you do there needs to speak the language of the CFO, the CEO, and has to demonstrate that workforce capability and true adoption progress, as well as the governance aspects to bring it all together for the reasons we've talked about. Okay. So I think, Ben, why don't, in the interest of time, why don't you close us here? Because I think on the pilots and what success looks like, I think we've talked about that throughout. Why don't you close us and bring us home here?
Yeah, no, thanks, Christian. Lots of good stuff, and hopefully people got a deeper understanding around the need to move with an intention and the value of that 3x3 framework and how we think about things in terms of stages of the journey and then those underlying tracks around getting your people ready, getting your organization ready, and making sure that you have governance in place. Those three tracks accelerate you moving from one stage to the next. Now, one of the things I love is we have taken all these insights and created what we call a readiness assessment, an AI operationalization readiness assessment. You can scan the code here, you can type in the URL that's here on the screen, and actually get a personalized set of insights, a readiness score. It's 27 questions that our team has spent a lot of time around. These are really core questions that need to be answered and reviewed. And we've taken all this stuff and made it available at no additional cost. And we've even offered to people that have completed this assessment a free follow-up 30-minute session with us in case you have questions, if you want to go deeper, if you want to explore next steps. So my recommendation to everyone attending today's session is take the time to go to this assessment and complete it. There's value in it. It's emailed to you, tons of interesting insights. It also gives you kind of a numeric score if you like quantitative and qualitative analysis, and then take advantage of that 30-minute session. Whether you're looking for a partner like Adoptify AI, whether you have your own internal initiatives and stuff, there's value in talking to us because we've done this before. We've helped organizations from small to large at the early stage of their journey to their later stages where they're trying to accelerate their best practices. You're going to get some value out of those 30 minutes. Christian, how did I do? Did I wrap it up pretty good?
You did awesome, and right on time, perfectly landed. We'll give you a 9.8 on the landing there. Well done, Ben. Appreciate it. And as always, it's great talking to you and doing these sessions with you. I hope there's lots of activity in the chat and lots of people that were joined us. I want to thank you again, everybody, for your time. And really appreciate that. And like Ben said, focus on that AI assessment. Reach out to us, and we'll be glad to help you and provide you some additional context, or if you have any questions.
Perfect. All right, let's wrap things up from our moderator. Take us home.
Yeah. So as we wrap up today's session, I would like to thank you, Ben and Christian, for sharing their, practical perspective on scaling enterprises AI successfully. And thank you, everyone who joined us today. We hope today's discussion has provided valuable insights that can take back your own organization. If you would like to continue the conversation or learn more about how structured AI readiness frameworks can support your organization, we would happy to help. We would happy to connect with you. Also, you will receive a follow-up email after today's session with the recording session. And thank you once again for participation. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone.